It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. A defiant Joe Biden admits his weaknesses after a disastrous TV debate as he's backed by senior figures in his party.
I don't debate as well as I used to. But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth.
Here, Rishi Sunak says Nigel Farage has questions to answer after one of the party's activists used a racial slur.
Well, my two daughters have to see and hear reform people who campaign for Nigel Farage calling me an effing it hurts and it makes me angry.
In Kenya, a family's grief at the first funeral of a protester shot dead during anti-government protests.
I'm not going to lie, she's a fantasy of mine. I mean, she's a fantasy of a lot of guys, isn't she?
Shown in court, the moment police arrested the man accused of plotting to kidnap Holly Willoughby. And what about the music? What happens when real life intrudes at the country's biggest music festival? Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. When you get knocked down, you get back up. Joe Biden's defiant message to voters tonight after his stumbling performance in the first head-to-head debate before the US presidential election. More than 50 million people tuned in to the prime-time event to see him spar with Donald Trump. And as Mr. Biden walked off stage, some of his supporters were already openly considering whether he should be asked to step aside. Tonight, as his former boss, Barack Obama, tweeted his support and his wife wore a dress urging people to vote for him, there is no sign he's listening. Our US correspondent, James Matthews, has our first report from Atlanta.
The morning after the debate before, and the mist hung heavy over Atlanta. It didn't cloud a clear-eyed and cold assessment that chilled the Democratic Party. 90 minutes had been a long watch in politics. The president found comfort among friends at a rally in North Carolina. Different setting, different Biden. Jill Biden wore a dress that said, "Vote." Team Biden said the message is he's staying in the race.
I know I'm not a young man. State the obvious. I don't walk as easy as I used to. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. I don't debate as well as I used to. But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth. And I know, like millions of Americans know, when you get knocked down, you get back up.
The debate between two old foes had put the question of infirmity centre stage. The performance of an 81-year-old president put it stage right.
With the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if...
A question on immigration ended like this.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Joe Biden went for waffles after the TV debate, not before a quick stage appearance with his wife, the First Lady. It wasn't as awkward as the TV debate, but perhaps not far off.
Joe, you did such a great job. You answered every question. You knew all the facts.
48 million Americans tuned in to the evening debate.
Thank you. Yes. He wasn't killed that.
Afterwards, public faces of the Democratic movement fronted up their concerns.
He had to prove to the American people was that he had the energy, he had the stamina, and he didn't do that.
The universal reaction was somewhere approaching panic.
He didn't do well at all. He did not do well at all.
The TV debate was triggered by Team Biden, designed to showcase strength and offer reassurance about the abilities of a Democratic president. Rather, it has imbued the party with a sense of crisis. Democrats who previously wouldn't listen to questions around infirmity are now openly calling for change at the top of the ticket. Concerned at how bad Biden was, and how bad he might get. Old, influential friends sought to steady the ship. Former President Barack Obama tweeted, "Bad debate nights happen, trust me, I know. But this election is still a choice between someone who's fought for ordinary folks his entire life and someone who only cares about himself." It was messaging to keep a party and public on side. In Atlanta, it seems the difficulty isn't so much connecting with the message, but the messenger.
He was definitely off, very off.
In what way?
Just didn't know his subject matter. Seemed like he was tired and out of it.
I think that people should focus more on substance rather than the pace of delivery.
We had someone who was speaking pretty much incoherent and we can't understand what he's saying, and then someone who's just awful and spewing lies. So it's not a good look for the American people. It really breaks my heart.
At a Friday rally in Virginia, Donald Trump took a bow.
Thank you. Hello, Virginia. Did anybody last night watch a thing called The Debate?
As bad a night as it was for the president, the Biden campaign insists he will absolutely not be stepping down. The president has styled himself as the man to beat Donald Trump in spite of party concerns. In these circumstances, losing would be quite the legacy. James Matthews, Sky News, in Atlanta, Georgia.
So just how easy would it be to replace Joe Biden? Well, the short answer is it would be very difficult, so close to November's presidential election. Voters have already overwhelmingly selected Mr. Biden as their candidate, a decision due to be formalised at the Democratic National Convention in August. Party delegates could choose to back someone new at that point, but that's unlikely. Joe Biden has strongly rejected pulling out of the race in the past. There is a slight possibility, though, that he could be persuaded to pull out. If he did it before the convention, there would be a messy free-for-all with several people vying for the party's nomination. And if he stood down after August, just 2 months before the country votes, the chair of his party can call an emergency meeting to elect a new nominee by majority vote. Among those likely to be considered, Vice President Kamala Harris, who is polling worse than Joe Biden, Minnesota Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who's proven she can take on the right and win, and the Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who backed the president immediately after the debate. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has been speaking to voters in Los Angeles about whether they think the president should step aside.
What? They're talking about golf.
Yeah, I don't understand what Joe Biden's saying. The TikTok generation is digesting a debate between two members of the geriatric generation.
You would be 82 at the end of your second term.
And a performance by President Biden that's already spawned 1,000 memes.
I think it sounds like a drunk blackout conversation they're having at 3 a.m.
I think Joe Biden is cognitively declining, and I think he was never fit to be president, and I don't think he is now. And I think there's a clear, obvious answer to who is fit.
In this part of California, they voted for Biden in 2020, but some are staggered by how much older he seems this time round.
How did it make you feel knowing that that's your choice if you want to vote Democrat?
Forlorn, not good, despairing.
Has President Biden's performance last night given you food for thought in terms of who you might vote for in November?
Clearly. Bad food for thought. Food poisoning.
Maybe at our age, we're the same age.
Yeah.
So maybe at our age we're a little slower to articulate what we're thinking, but I think he's still viable and he has the mental capacity to do the job. My concern is the energy level.
President Biden is insistent that he will still run in November, but chatter is now intensifying about possible alternatives, including the governor of this state, California.
Gavin Newsom is a rising star in the Democratic Party, tipped as a successor to Biden, but he's standing squarely behind the leader for now.
We've got to have the back of this president. You don't turn your back because of one performance. What kind of party does that? It's been a masterclass. 15.6 million jobs. That's 8 times more than the last 3 Republican presidents combined.
Gretchen Whitmer is another potential candidate. She is the governor of Michigan, a crucial swing state. In California, Democrat voters wonder if a fresh face could give their party a lifeline.
Have you got anyone in mind, different candidate?
Yeah, Gavin Newsom. He's a very powerful presence, at least in California.
It would be in their best interest to get, Biden to step down and have somebody else run for the Democrats, because by the looks of it, it's not looking good.
Have you got anyone in mind?
I don't. I mean, I just know I would vote for
anyone but Biden.
Anyone but Biden or Trump.
Martin is one of the double haters, voters who are dismayed that Biden or Trump is likely to be their choice. After last night's debate, those double haters may well have swelled in number. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Manhattan Beach.
Let's take you live to Atlanta now. Our US correspondent there, James Matthews. And James, Joe Biden came out fighting tonight at the rally that he spoke at earlier, but did he do enough?
Hi, Gillian. Well, it's a start. It's a step on what is now a comeback trail from Joe Biden after a horrendous night for himself and for his party. He didn't slip up, certainly. He was amongst friends. He had the comfort of an adoring audience who gave him applause and cheers and adulation at the end of a sentence. But the difficulty is that that audience and the audience at large was waiting and scrutinising Joe Biden to see if he would falter. And that is his problem between now and November. Whatever he says, wherever he goes, he will be closely scrutinised for durability, for longevity. And that's a problem, because that creates an obstacle between a candidate and the electorate. Voters who perhaps don't want to vote for Trump are looking for an excuse to vote for Joe Biden. They're looking for durability. They want to trust in his longevity and suitability for office. He didn't deliver that last night, not by a long way. And it's creating concern very much within the Democratic Party. There is talk of crisis in the party. Democrats I've spoken today who are looking for re-election in November and beyond, they're making the point that what they want to talk about with voters is themselves, their opponents, their agenda, their plans. But what they are being sucked into is the most awkward conversation about a president who didn't look fit for office last night. And their concern is that Joe Biden, through stubbornness and ego and an unwillingness to step back from his candidacy, they're concerned that that will cost them victory at the election and that will deliver a Trump presidency.
James, thank you. It's rare to see the Prime Minister get as emotional and as personal as he did today. He was talking about his two daughters and how hurt and angry he was that they'd have to hear an activist campaigning for reform using a racial slur to describe him. Mr. Sunak used that P word in his interview with journalists, saying it was important to call it out for what it was. Tonight, Nigel Farage repeated his claims that the secret recording was a deliberate attempt to smear his party. That's been denied by all those involved, as our political correspondent Darren McCaffrey reports.
It looks very yummy. Do you think I can take some home with me?
No!
Oh, no! Yeah.
Campaigning today in a Teesside school, an emotional Prime Minister confronted head-on what he viewed as a very personal racist attack on him and his family.
Yeah, well, my two daughters have to see and hear reform people who campaign for Nigel Farage calling me an effing. It hurts and it makes me angry, and I think he has some questions to answer. And I don't repeat those words lightly. I do so deliberately because this is too important not to call out clearly for what it is.
Off camera later, Rishi Sunak claimed he hated repeating that racist slur, but felt it was necessary. In reaction to a reform canvasser filmed by an undercover reporter making a series of racist remarks.
Always been a Tory voter. What annoys me is he got in. What's good is he? You tell me, he's just wet. What, Sunak? Useless. Hello.
After earlier describing the comments as horrendous and appalling, Nigel Farage tonight went on the offensive, claiming time and again that the story was a setup.
I'm not going to apologise for what, and we'll find out the full truth.
But I promise you, what happened over the weekend, what was on the front page of the Times today, is a setup, a deliberate attempt to smear us. It's almost, when you look at it, what he said is almost unbelievable. A constant stream of invective. And he does this for a living, he does it professionally, and he came along in his alter ego and did it. It's wrong.
Those claims have been repeatedly denied by Channel 4 and the man himself, who said he was just a volunteer. He told Sky News, "I still use old words. There's no racism at all in it. I still support Nigel Farage." That support by people accused of racism has dogged Nigel Farage for lots of his political career. This election has been no different, with problems around the vetting of candidates. One this week was suspended for previous membership of the BNP. And despite attempts by Reform campaigning today to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the story, it is making people in battleground Basildon think again.
Reform I can't even talk about. After what was said today as well, disgraceful.
That's not on, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a party to come in and actually start looking after the people that live in England, whatever colour.
It had nothing to do with Reform. He was a volunteer. So all they're doing is throwing things to try and make things stick.
Both political parties have had to confront racism in recent years, including the Conservatives. But for Reform, it appears to be a continuing problem, and one that seems certain to cost them votes next week. Darren McCaffrey, Sky News, Teesside.
It's the moment the man accused of plotting to kidnap, rape and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby is confronted by police. Caught on an officer's body camera, security guard Gavin Plum admits fantasising about the star. Today, as the video was shown in court, he described her as a celebrity crush, but insisted his plan, which he posted online, was just a way to pass the time. Sabah Chowdhury reports.
Police! Stay where you are! The moment Gavin Plum's so-called fantasy became reality.
You're under arrest for conspiracy to kidnap. Who? Holly Willoughby. I don't think those ones.
Arrested for plotting to kidnap, rape and murder the TV presenter Holly Willoughby.
I'm not going to lie, she's a fantasy of mine. I mean, she's a fantasy of a lot of guys, isn't she?
In police custody after his arrest, as his house was being searched, he tells an officer, "I can pretty much guess what they're looking for." Plum denies all the charges. Speaking in court for the first time, Plum said Holly Willoughby was his celebrity crush, and that the highly sexual and graphic things he said he was going to do to her was simply a fantasy, online chats and nothing more, for his gratification. He told the court he was just passing the time chatting. And that the police discovery of this kidnap kit, as it was called by prosecutors, was not meant to be used to attack Holly Willoughby. Instead, he said his sex toys were for someone who is consenting. When details of his alleged kidnap plot were read to him, Mr. Plum said his 25 to 30 stone weight would have prevented him from carrying out the attack. He said he was sorry, heartbroken and disgusted his chats have come out. The defendant, Gavin Plum, says that his online conversations were just pure fantasy, but the prosecution's case is that his intent was very real and not just the ramblings of a fantasist. The jury heard he was previously convicted for attempted kidnap and false imprisonment. The trial is expected to come to a close in the coming days. Holly Willoughby isn't expected to take the stand. Sabah Chowdhury, Sky News in Chelmsford.
To Kenya now, where the first funeral was held today for a protester killed while storming the country's parliament. Ibrahim Wanjiku was 19 years old. He was shot twice in the neck, one of around 27 people who died during a week of violence. Our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bagir, has been speaking to his best friend and to grieving families preparing to bury their dead.
It's a look of sheer resolve. The weight he's carrying is not just a loved one, but a symbol of a nation in mourning. This is the first funeral in Nairobi of a protester killed in the violent crackdown. In the casket is Ibrahim Wanjiku. He was only 19 years old.
There's grief
but there's also a lot of anger here. And just by the very nature of how he died, this isn't just a procession, it's also a protest.
We feel embarrassed, but Allah, we feel embarrassed. But Allah, because whatever they have done is not fair. This is our brother. We are doing peaceful demonstration, but they decided to shoot us like bullets. But inshallah, Allah will pray for us.
He's laid to rest. But around him, there's unrest. The disturbing way he died, 2 shots in the neck, can never be buried.
Fighting, protesting for our country.
Ibrahim's best friend was marching with him the day he was killed.
Yes, Ibrahim.
He tells us it could have been him instead.
And here is me. He disappeared. The message came at home that he's dead, found at the mortuary in Nairobi. And that's the story we have. Now we are here, burying our friend. It's so sad.
Kenya has changed forever. It is never going to be the same again. The Gen Zs have lost their innocence.
Community organizers are scrambling to identify bodies and alert families.
We are heading back there now to get the results for the 5 autopsies that were being undertaken.
They move from the cemetery to the city mortuary.
We will stand with them. I'm telling them their son, their brother, has died a hero of this country. We had Mau Maus fighting for independence, but these are Mau Maus fighting for the independence again.
Do you feel like young people should keep protesting?
They should keep fighting for it. They never died in vain.
An embrace of support between 2 hurting siblings, here to send off their older brother. He comes out in cold steel, and on their faces is the shock of families across the country. Yusra al-Baghir, Sky News, Nairobi.
Police in Tenerife say a large-scale search for British teenager Jay Slater will take place tomorrow in the village of Mascot. Dozens of volunteers will scour the rocky area close to where he went missing on the 17th of June. The 19-year-old from Lancashire disappeared while walking back to his accommodation after missing a bus. Princess Anne has been discharged from hospital after being treated for concussion. The Princess Royal spent 5 nights at Bristol's Southmead Hospital. Doctors say she'd suffered injuries consistent with being kicked or headbutted by a horse. She'll spend some time recovering at home before returning to public duties. 4 major UK banks have apologised after thousands of people were unable to access their online accounts. HSBC, Barclays, Nationwide and Virgin Money customers had issues sending and receiving money for several hours. The issues have now been resolved. 8 nurses are suing their NHS trust for sexual harassment and discrimination over a policy allowing trans women to use female changing rooms. When they raised concerns with their employers, they say they were told they needed to be re-educated. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting has now offered to meet them, as Alice Porter reports.
These are some of the nurses who say they don't feel safe sharing changing rooms with a trans colleague.
It's degrading.
It feels humiliating.
Humiliating, yeah. Yeah, it's an open changing room. There aren't anywhere, there's nowhere to hide in there. We all have to get changed out in the open, so we're vulnerable.
One of the nurses, who wishes to be anonymous, has experienced sexual abuse and has PTSD. She says she finds having a trans woman in the changing room triggering. Others have objected on religious grounds.
We have Muslim women, we've got Christian women, and we've heard about women, you know, wearing clothes underneath their uniform so that they don't have to actually get completely undressed in the changing room.
And to wear a vest and leggings under your uniform in the heat at the minute, it's just absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah.
26 nurses wrote a letter to their trust. A meeting then happened with their ward manager and HR.
She was kind of told that your staff need to be re-educated.
The situation has now escalated politically, with the Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting tweeting, I support the nurses and I'm horrified that they've had to resort to legal action. We've got to find a better way through this, and I'd be happy to meet them. We've got to find a way through that treats trans people with respect and respects women's safe spaces. The Conservatives want to amend the Equality Act so that single-sex spaces like changing rooms can't be accessed by someone who's biologically male but identifies as a woman. Labour hasn't backed the plans, but Keir Starmer says he's committed to protecting single-sex spaces. But transgender activists say people should be able to access facilities according to their gender identity.
There's a path forward through those conversations to acceptance, because ultimately including transgender people isn't hurting anyone. What's hurting people is this fear that has been stirred up, and that's not just hurting transgender people, it's hurting everybody.
County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation Trust say they are investigating the nurses' allegations but can't comment further because of the legal action. Women's rights and trans rights have been a heated topic throughout this election campaign, with no resolution in sight. Alice Porter, Sky News.
To Glastonbury now, a festival with a very different feel this year. That's because real life is intruding. Looming elections, war in the Middle East, even the Euros. So what about the music? Sky's entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer has been finding out.
Running at Glastonbury? If ever there was a sign of something being a little off kilter this year, warding off hangovers before headliners, not everyone's sober for opening act fitness phenomenon Joe Wicks.
I'm pretty convinced there was a lookalike in the crowd that looked just like me, and he hadn't had a wink of sleep because he was holding a beer and he was up and down on the spot like that, giving it that. And I just admire anyone that's willing to have a workout, after a big boozy night out.
A strange year at Worthy Farm, all things considered, with plenty of real-world distractions. The looming elections, Gaza protests, climate change frustration, not forgetting the football.
COVID as well, people got out of the habit of going to gigs.
It just means the escapism is even more necessary.
But it's hardly surprising that this event is distracted from the music when the industry as a whole is in the same position.
This year's headliners may be a bit underwhelming, but how is Glastonbury supposed to impress when the whole music business is struggling to produce new stars? The cost of touring, lack of remuneration from streaming and AI, just some of the challenges facing the industry, and reflected here in its favourite playground.
Unlike other festivals, Glastonbury at least is not at risk of closure, unlike the 50 events that have had to pull the plug so far this year. But that doesn't mean financial pressures aren't being felt. At least one act pulled out, citing the cost of the event versus the lack of reward, as they hadn't been selected for a televised set.
I don't blame artists if they can't afford to play. That's fair enough. I have made a loss at Glastonbury before, not this year. It is quite tough for many people in the industry, particularly people starting out. It's difficult making the break from amateur to professional, much more difficult than it was in my day.
Of course, there's still huge amounts here to keep audiences entertained. If what's been officially announced doesn't float your boat, only a handful of people privy to know who's playing the so-called secret sets.
There's going to be some big surprises around the site, doing some very small slots. Kasabian, Kings of Leon, Pulp, and Charlie XCX. Those are the more likely ones. We have heard of some very interesting things.
Some surprises still to come, and let's face it, who wants to focus on industry issues when there's so much fun to be had? But once this weekend is over, it could well be time to face the music. Katie Spencer on Worthy Farm.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by political journalist Zoe Grenovold and political commentator Benedict Spence. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Financial Times. Its headline, Biden defies calls to bow out. We'll be right back. Do stay with us. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. President Biden has admitted he cannot debate the way he used to, but still intends to win despite a faltering performance against Donald Trump last night. The Prime Minister has said he's hurt and angry after a Reform UK activist referred to him using the P word. And the man accused of plotting to kidnap, rape and murder Holly Willoughby has told a court it was a fantasy that he never intended to carry out. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with political journalist Zoe Grenvold and political commentator Benedict Spence. They'll be with us from now right up until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of the front pages for you. Well, Biden defies calls to bow out. That's the lead story in the Financial Times, amid concerns that Joe Biden might not be fit to run in November's presidential election, based on his worrying performance in last night's TV debate with Donald Trump. The Guardian, too, says there's pressure for him to quit after a shaky performance last night. But according to The Telegraph, Democratic officials and party donors have given Mr. Biden a week to stand down. The Daily Star sums up the whole debate with this headline: Man baby beats up doddery old bloke on live TV. The racist slur directed at Prime Minister Rishi Sunak by a Reform UK supporter leads the Express, with Mr. Sunak expressing hurt and anger that his daughters had to hear it. Meanwhile, former Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch tells The Times that Nigel Farage is only in politics to be a celebrity and doesn't care if Reform candidates are racist or misogynists. The Mail has been speaking to former PM Boris Johnson, who insists it's still possible to avoid a Labour landslide on Thursday, and what he calls Starmageddon. The Eye says the UK public have overwhelmingly backed the paper's campaign for both major parties to clean up the country's water supplies, whichever one wins the election. A friend of missing teen Jay Slater tells The Mirror he saw Jay sliding down rocks on the morning he disappeared on the holiday island of Tenerife. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by political journalist Zoe Grenvold and political commentator Benedict Spence. Welcome to both of you. We're going to start with the FT front page and their headline there: Biden defies calls to bow out after what's been described as that disastrous debate with Donald Trump last night. Benedict.
I mean, it's filtered through even to this side of the pond that it was not the proudest moment for Joe Biden. It did not come across particularly well. He did not perform very well, and it was sort of laid bare for everybody to see what has been hinted at for a while, which is that the president is not in the best shape. And as you can see, now we're getting the reaction. For the week leading up to this debate, actually, a lot of the lines that were coming out of Democrat mouthpieces, members of the press, was actually this is all being over-egged. He's just, he works very hard. He's not as fast as he used to be, but there's a lot of, propaganda, fake news out there that he's lost it, that, that this is coming from the Conservative press. It's not true. Now the tone has very much changed, and this is what it says on the front page of the FT, which is that Biden is resisting calls to step back. But, if anybody glanced at, say, the opinion section of the New York Times today, actually it was fairly clear that the attitude, the mood has swung very firmly in quite a somber direction away from Joe Biden. People saying that this is the worst debate performance they've ever seen, that he can't actually stay the course. Many people saying that it would be the best in his best interest and the party's best interest, and of course, if you're a Democrat, the country's best interest, to step aside. It would, I think, be unprecedented at this point. Quite how you would swing this past people in the party and then be able to, do it in a democratic way and then have a new candidate who would go up against Donald Trump with so little time, relatively. That would have to be a very rare candidate with, big sort of a public appeal, public awareness. Could it be Kamala Harris? She's not polling particularly well, even compared to Joe Biden.
Lower than Joe Biden.
Yeah, so they are really in a very difficult situation, and I think it says something, I think, about the US ecosystem, political media ecosystem, that so many Democrats, senior Democrats, were prepared to believe, oh, this is something that we can fight our way through, that actually he will be fine when it comes to it. In the end, it almost appeared as if Donald Trump was slightly pulling his punches at the end of the debate because it was so one-sided, and I think you might see something unprecedented in the next couple of weeks. Donors apparently are urging people with links to the president to say, look, don't do this, tell him it's time to step aside. People are saying that Obama or Bill Clinton need to talk to him, need to persuade him. A lot of people saying the only way that you'll get through to him is if his wife, Jill Biden, says it's time to go. But really, I mean, what a sea change in the space of just 24 hours.
Yes, and we do have a tweet in from Bill Clinton, as you mention him, which I think we can bring up. What he's actually said is, I'll leave the debate racing to the pundits, but here's what I know. Facts and history matter. Joe Biden has given us 3 years of solid leadership, steadying us after the pandemic, creating a record number of new jobs, making real progress, solving the climate crisis, and launching a successful effort in reducing inflation, all while pulling us out of the quagmire Donald Trump left us in. That's what's really at stake in November. So that intervention from Bill Clinton there. Do you think this will make any difference, Zoe, or will this possibly fall on deaf ears because the damage has been done?
I think it hints at what Benedict was saying, which is that actually there is a feeling, or has been a feeling, that it's too late now to change course, that the candidate is Joe Biden, that's what Biden wants to do, and we had to fall in line behind him. And I think what we're going to see now are divisions amongst the Democrats as to whether or not actually they are just going to, head for wipeout if they carry on with Biden. It's much better to cut their losses and try and find a new candidate. But obviously they have to convince Biden that that's the best option. And with that, you need those influential voices there. In a way, I know we've moaned incessantly and completely reasonably, in my view, about the amount of Tory leaders we've had over the past 3 years. But when you look at something like this, when you see that there is a push from the party to change leaders, when you think about what it could mean for the state of US politics, having mechanisms in place to force, for example, a vote of no confidence, or to, have a party stand up and say, actually, this isn't best for the party, this isn't best for the country, can actually be quite helpful. Otherwise, you get situations like this, which, as Benedict says, is completely unprecedented.
But there is a mechanism. It would be very, very difficult, but there is, I think, a window of about 5 days or so in which they could put somebody else forward. Let's look at the Star as we discuss this. And their headline, "Man Baby beats up doddery old bloke on live TV." Fair description?
I think it was, actually. And I think, let's be clear, Donald Trump was not actually at his sort of fiery best. It wasn't sort of magnificent rhetoric or jokes or anything like that. It was just him up against somebody who he joked about Joe Biden not knowing what he'd just said 2 minutes ago. But genuinely, a lot of people, including a lot of Democrats, was out there going, there might be some truth to that. Honestly, though, I mean, this is going to be the difficult thing, because what we will see in the next week is, as Zoe says, it's going to be sort of very tumultuous. Will he, won't he change course? Will there be somebody else? Will it be Gavin Newsom? Could it be somebody else? What you will also see, though, because of the slightly iffy and unprecedented nature of that, I suspect, is paranoia from the Republicans, which will be, look, they're trying to steal it again. And that will be the line that you will see coming out from the man baby. That'll be the sort of the classic, it's rigged, it's a steal. If they try to change... If the Democrats try to change the candidate now, that will be the new attack line from the Republicans, which is, look, they're trying to stitch it up. They know that doddery old Joe, or Sleepy Joe, whatever they're going to call him, isn't up to it. So now they're going to try and force somebody new on you at the last minute. And they're going to pretend that, they think that you're stupid, that you're not going to see what's going on. That's what you'll see a lot more of. And that is the sort of the ramping up of the I would call it paranoia, that it's a steal, that it's a deep state conspiracy. We have all heard it before from Trump. You'll see a lot more of that if the Democrats do go in that direction.
Let's just spool through the Guardian, I think, and the Telegraph also covering the story. But Zoe, I wondered what you thought of his performance this evening at the rally, because it was a totally different Joe Biden, very spirited performance, obviously different circumstances. He had a teleprompter and a very fawning audience as well.
I think that's the point. It did feel like a different Biden. He seemed a lot more alive, awake, raring to go, a lot more enthused. But as you say, there was far more support for him there. And actually, the really important thing is, whether he can beat Trump and if he's going head-to-head with Trump. And it really is his to steal. You know, Trump is a convicted felon. You know, he's got a track record for all sorts. He's got a terrible track record. There's so many things that Biden can throw at him. And if out of that, Biden comes out looking worse, well, that's game over, really. So, yes, it's one thing doing a speech and doing a rally and being able to be very kind of personable. And, you know, he's got a lot to speak of for his success as a president. But really, it comes down to how he is against Donald Trump. And I think that is the thing that's going to be concerning his party.
Yeah, indeed. Let's move to the Express and our domestic politics and Rishi Sunak. Really furious. The most angry that, you know, our reporters are saying that they've seen him on these racial slurs made by a Reform UK supporter.
And you can imagine, you can understand entirely why he would be furious at this. And, you know, I think it's a very difficult moment for Rishi Sunak to sort of have to look at the way that Reform have been able to siphon off support from the Conservative Party at this election, and then to sort of hear this sort of language, whether or not it's an individual or a couple of individuals, or whether or not it's widespread. It must be incredibly painful, actually, to sort of put your career on the line, to sort of throwing yourself into the firing line to try to do the best thing for your party, and to be rewarded not only with people leaving and not supporting your party, but these kind of attitudes, and to think, actually, has there been that much progress? Again, as I say, this is only a few people. It's not necessarily representative of all Reform voters, or even a large minority of them. But you can sort of sense the anger. The tricky thing, of course, though, is, which we all sort of have to face up to, is how much does this end up actually damaging or affecting the outcome of this election? Is it going to stop Nigel Farage from winning in Clacton? I suspect it probably isn't. And part of that, whether or not individuals are saying reprehensible things, is because of the performance of the government itself, is that so many people are so disillusioned that actually people, activists, they can get away with saying awful things. And that many people are still so resigned to the state of the country that they'll go, what are you going to do? It's not that big a deal. It's one person. It's 2 or 3 people. That's a really sad place, actually, that we've got to in any political cycle, actually, where you can have a story like this. And the response is probably that the dial in the polls isn't going to shift. And that's not because people are racist. It's because of a general sense of political apathy.
Zoe, do you think that this story will affect Nigel Farage's chances?
I think it should, absolutely. And, you know, it's the language that has been used is appalling. And I think it was really good to see Rishi Sunak come out today and really condemn that language and talk about how damaging it is, and talking about this corrosive and divisive behaviour. I think Benedict's right in that so many people have abandoned the Conservatives because they feel let down, and there's very little that can bring them back now. Whether they vote for Reform, whether they vote for Labour, whether they choose not to vote at all, I think that ship has sailed. There is nothing the Conservatives can do to bring that back. And unfortunately, I think Rishi Sunak showed a really strong side of himself today responding to this. And if he'd been able to show that part of him earlier, I think that would have actually gone down really well with the voters. But, you know, Nigel Farage does have this almost fanatical following of people who really believe him and believe everything he says and thinks that he is the politician to bring the country out of its misery. I mean, it's not the case, but he's almost got that sort of Trumpian appeal to him. And I don't think, and as it should, I just don't think this is going to really impact his poll ratings.
I mean, as you say, that sort of Trumpian element, there's been a lot of Reform activists coming out today saying, it was a plant, it was a setup. That, you know, we all know we've heard that sort of thing before. Oh, don't believe your lying eyes.
Well, Nigel Farage has said himself that he's an actor.
Yeah, but I would say just very briefly, I think the one missed opportunity for Rishi Sunak throughout this election campaign is he's not had the opportunity to debate Nigel Farage. Actually, Farage has been stealing all of the support from the Tories. At no point has Sunak been able to go on a stage with him and go, do you know what? Much like Starmer has been able to take chunks out of me on a debate stage, I can have a go at him. I can actually push him on the language used by campaigners, on your policies. He's not had that opportunity. It's been an open run for Farage to just take that support away, and Sunak hasn't had really a level playing field to counter it.
Interesting. Let's talk about Boris Johnson. He's saying that the country can Swerver a Starmageddon, Zoe.
Yes, he is, although I tried reading it and I couldn't quite figure out what the point of this piece was, which is very Boris Johnson-esque way of writing. I think essentially what he's saying is he says it's an impassioned plea to stop the country lurching to a socialist supremacy. We've heard lots of warnings from the Tories today that Starmer could be in power forever and, you know, you'll never not see a Labour government. But he's sort of saying that
Forever's a long time.
I know, forever is a long time. But, you know, this idea that you would give Keir Starmer a blank cheque and you just basically imploring all those voters who were 2019 Tory voters who are now not sure that they can give their vote to the Conservatives anymore, but not sure where they can put it, to come back, to trust that their vote is safer with the Tories. And, you know, Boris Johnson still has quite a big following, mostly with Daily Mail readers, so it's not a surprise he's made this intervention. And whether it will be helpful, whether it will shift the polls, I doubt it.
OK, Zoe and Benedict, we must leave it there to take a break. More coming up, including this story in The Telegraph about Labour's plans to ration middle-class access to services. Stay with us for more on that.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, political journalist Zoe Grunewald and political commentator Benedict Spence. We're going to take a look at the Telegraph and this story about, well, the headline saying a Labour plan to ration middle-class access to services. Explain, Benedict.
So this is already a law for anybody interested. This is a law that's just not been enacted or interpreted a certain way. This is the Equality Act in 2010, passed by Gordon Brown, which, once Labour are back in power, this has been suggested based on a reading of their manifesto, will lead to the Labour Party using this law to look to redistribute money based on socio-economic factors rather than anything else. So it'll mean effectively that priority is given to poorer areas in certain services over wealthier areas. It'll also lead to more money being drawn from things like council tax, so wealthier areas might have to end up paying more council tax for their services. It's, if you like, it's a form of levelling up, which, you know, is something that's been heard elsewhere. But what the Telegraph is saying is that basically it's going to mean that the middle classes go to the back of the queue, that their services aren't quite as good as people in poorer areas, and that'll be down to things like healthcare, it'll be bins, it'll be police turning up to burglaries, that sort of thing. It may or may not be the case. We have no idea, actually, until Labour come into power. But what I would say is, if Labour are smart, they would not immediately bring in a sort of a system where people who are already squeezed in the middle classes feel actually that their services, who many of those middle classes are voting against the Conservatives because they feel that those services have been getting worse, that the Labour Party would then turn around to those people and say, and guess what, they're going to get even more, you know, badly run because we're going to give even more resources to people in other areas. I don't think that that would be a particularly smart social or political move. If it does happen, then they would deserve to lose support. But for that reason, I don't think it is going to happen. I suspect that this is just a little bit of fear-mongering based on an interpretation of something that's in the manifesto. But we wait and see. Maybe the middle classes will be persuaded by this. Maybe this will happen.
Zoe, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think social mobility and levelling up is a kind of key part of Labour's plan, and what they really want to do is make sure that those who are struggling and those who don't have access to services should get it. And I think part of that is redistributing wealth, but it's also redistributing access to resources. And I think it's actually makes a lot of sense to me. I'm surprised people would argue with the idea that actually those who are in poorer areas or those in areas of more social deprivation should get slightly more state support. I think that is the sort of thing the middle classes would quite like.
I mean, as I say, the Conservatives have been leading on the... No, they haven't actually done anything with it, but they were leading on the idea of levelling up and, you know, sort of trying to improve under-resourced and deprived parts of the country. They weren't very successful at it, but presumably that sort of thing is very popular because a lot of people voted for Boris Johnson on that basis. So
yes,
it can't be completely, you know, bonkers, which is, you know, sort of the suggestion here.
Yeah, it's a widely popular idea, and I think Benedict is right that I don't think that means Keir Starmer is about to come along and say, actually, you guys aren't going to get your bins collected.
School and that sort of thing.
I'm sure it's not that. I'm sure it's more about redistributing and making sure that those poorer areas are getting the support they need.
Benedict, you've got about 30 seconds to tell us
do I?
about
Okay.
why we pay
apparently
more
UK,
for electricity.
Yeah, UK households pay more for electricity than all of the EU. I know, that sounds awful. Supposedly this is because we're not doubling down on renewables. That's according to one person. Is a myriad of reasons, obviously. Different parts of Europe, they use different things. Germany is able to burn coal very cheaply, which obviously we're not able to do. France is able to use nuclear power very cheaply because it invested in nuclear power a long time ago. We haven't done any of these things. We haven't upgraded our grid, and that's why we're paying more, because it's very expensive.
Well done. You can take a breath now. Benedict and Zoe, thank you very much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you at the top of the hour.